Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Unlocking the Potential of STI Testing in Urgent Care, Business, Population Health, and Clinical Perspectives. My name is Samantha Burke. I am NARUCA's Administrative Director. Now, for those of you who don't know, NARUCA is in its 12th year of existence, and today, NARUCA provides grassroots local representation in partnership with UCA's National Strength. We integrate urgent care medicine into broader public health initiatives, and we provide education and advocacy for urgent care medicine in the Northeast region. Now, lastly, I would like to thank our platinum sponsors for their continuing support, Health Track RX. And with that, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Ben Fabre.
Thank you, Samantha. No matter your role in urgent care, today's webinar has something for you. Here's why. Today, we're going to discuss the clinical, operational, and financial challenges and opportunities regarding treatment, a special patient type, patients with sexually transmitted infections, unlocking the potential for STI testing in urgent care. My name is Ben Fabre. I'll be your host for today's session. Now let me introduce our experts. We begin with Alan Ayers. Alan's the president of Urgent Care Consultants. Alan, you've published extensively on improving urgent care operations and efficiency. Thank you for joining us today. Next, we have Dr. Stephen Goldberg. Dr. Goldberg is the Chief Medical Officer of Health Track RX, and more importantly, is an emergency room physician and an urgent care physician with the University of Louisville Health, and really understands what it's like at the front lines treating these patients. Ali Prigo is the Medical Science Liaison for Health Track RX. She's also a physician assistant with Modern Pediatrics. With that, Alan, the stage is yours. Walk us through the business perspectives of urgent care related to sexually transmitted infection patient care.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Ben. A little bit more about myself. When I first got into urgent care 20 years ago, there were only about 1,200 centers. Today, that number is closer to 15,000. So I've not only seen, but I've participated in the entire life cycle of the urgent care industry. I've been a CEO, COO for 8 years, served the board of directors of the National Association, UCA. I'm also a senior editor of the Journal of Urgent Care. So I've written a couple hundred articles on the subject. I always like to level set with the basic economics of urgent care. Urgent care is a business, and everything kind of comes back to how does urgent care make money? So in any business, your revenue is equal to volume times rate. How much did you sell times how much you sold it for? So if we think of retail, Walmart sells a lot for less. Saks Fifth Avenue sells less for a lot. Fortunately, in healthcare, our rates are set by third parties. So we don't have the ability to set our prices like most retailers. Now, you can collect on your full rate. That's really a different question. But because rate is somewhat stable or somewhat set by others, that means urgent care is a volume-driven business. We make money in urgent care by more feet through the door. The volume is the one lever that we really have to drive revenue in our business. I would also add that labor functions as a fixed cost. So in any business, you have variable costs. The variable cost is the cost attached to each additional unit. In our case, that would be the cost attached per patient. But you have fixed costs, which are the costs to open the doors in the morning before you see a single patient. Because urgent care typically starts and finishes with one team working in the center, so your nurse practitioner, your medical assistants, your x-ray tech, your front desk, because you have a set skeletal crew, first thing when you open in 12 hours until you close later, labor really functions as a fixed cost in urgent care. So that means urgent care has a lot more in common economically with a high fixed cost business. So an example of high fixed cost business would be like a hotel. It would be an airline. We're typically talking in those instances of high fixed capital cost. But again, labor as a fixed cost creates the same economic situation. And so that means that, one, in order to maximize productivity of our staff, our KPI becomes patients per hour per provider. So we're not only driving volume, but as we drive volume, volume leverages the fixed cost of our provider. And then when we compare, again, to other types of businesses, say, for instance, an airline sells a perishable product, meaning that as soon as the plane backs up from the gate, the ability to sell that empty seat is forever lost. I would say urgent care, we really need to have the same mindset that if a provider can see 4 patients an hour, but they only saw 2 patients an hour, as soon as the clock rolls over 12, the ability to see those 2 additional patients per hour is forever lost. So to that point, I would say that the average urgent care is operating at about 58% capacity with surplus capacity of 43%. I would say the biggest loss in urgent care is this loss due to surplus capacity. And so again, to create a visual image, this would be like the plane taking off with 48% of the seats empty. It would be like the hotel renting out 58% of the rooms while 43% of the rooms sit empty. We have unutilized provider capacity of 1.7 patients per hour on average. So given this situation of excess capacity in urgent care, this chart here shows how urgent care profitability is volume driven. So again, looking at our green line here in the middle, when we open first thing in the morning, this center is incurring just shy of maybe $3,000 in staffing expense that day. That expense is sunk cost, staffing, rent, utilities, marketing, all the costs that are incurred the moment you open the door, whether you see 1 patient or 5 or 500 patients. The point is, then as you see patients come through the door, which would be our orange line, every new patient that walks through the door starts chipping away at that fixed cost. In this model, I'm using $135 as the net revenue per visit. So in $135 increments, we're chipping away at that fixed cost until we see the intersecting line in the middle at about 24 patients a day, where the center is breaking even. Now, if you have a higher net revenue per visit, if you run a more lean operation, that number of visits per day to break even can be as low as 18. I've heard it as low as 12, but that number is really going to be a function of what your costs are and what your revenue per patient is. So the economics of urgent care and why additional visits are important, and again, why we are considered a volume-driven business, is once you hit that break-even volume, every visit through the door, chipping away at those costs until you break even, then almost entirely every additional visit flows through to your bottom line. It flows to profitability. And so what we see here on the pink or purple line is that going from 0% margin all the way up to, if the center were to achieve about 50 visits a day, you would be hitting an EBITDA margin in the 50%. That's assuming once you get to about 50 patients a day, you have to add another provider and the chart kind of resets. We're not going to get into that minutiae here. But really the point is each additional visit is almost pure profit for the urgent care. So this is really why we would say urgent care is volume driven.
Great benchmarking data. I really love that perspective. The analogy of the airplane in a hotel, it puts things in perspective, is like, we got to get people through the door is really what rings the cash register the most.
Yes, most certainly. And if we're looking at about $135 revenue per visit, the variable cost per visit can be around $12, $15. So that means almost every additional visit, once you break even, about 90% of that is profit. Again, key is volume. A center that sees 35 visits is going to be far more profitable than one that sees 25, and one that sees 45 visits is going to be exponentially more profitable. With that, key in urgent care is pushing volume through the door. Well, we also have a challenge in urgent care in that the business is very seasonal. And so right now, some clinic operators are scratching their heads saying, with this mix of respiratory, influenza, strep, COVID, RSV going around, we don't need extra patients, but that's not true all year. And as I pointed out, the excess capacity is sitting idle over the year. Really, the key to driving additional profitability is driving additional visits. Well, to me, STI testing is a natural fit for this. And so when I look across STI testing, and I did a feature article in JUSM in the Journal of Urgent Care last fall. If you want to Google that, you can find some of these statistics outlined in more detail in the article. But when I sort from high to low, urgent care centers that are doing a lot of STI testing to those that are doing little to none, the findings are really remarkable. And as the chart on the left illustrates, 50% of urgent cares are doing essentially no STI testing at all. If they're doing it, it's in a completely immaterial amount. The top 5%, it's about 3.8% of their visits. The top 10%, 2.8%. And then the top quartile, it's averaging 1.3% of their visits. So what we see here with the chart on the left is that urgent care is highly bifurcated. Those that are doing it and doing it well are doing it in fairly significant numbers, where we have half of urgent care not doing any at all. Then what I would say is, looking at the chart on the right, again, sorting from high to low, when I look at the total volume of centers that are doing more STI testing, so the top 1% of centers in terms of their STI volume sees an average of 55 patients a day. The average urgent care is seeing around the 50th percentile, between 29 and 36 visits a day. So we see centers that have focused on STI testing are not only seeing the volume from the STI testing, and for those top performers, it's 6% of their visits, or about 3.3 incremental visits per day. And remember what we said about incremental visits per day. Overall, these centers are on average busier. I would say that STI testing clearly is a part of that 55 visits per day, but if you do the math, it's not driven entirely by STI testing. To me, this would indicate that those centers that are doing more STI testing are executing well on all aspects of their business, and therefore seeing more visits per day than those that are doing very little to no STI testing, and therefore seeing far fewer patients a day. So it really goes to establishing yourself as the go-to place for test and treat, which urgent care very successfully branded itself during the pandemic. Is if you need a test and you need a script, urgent care is where you go. Not only if you are not doing any material volume of STI testing that you're missing out, but others are marketing to your patients. So I thought the billboard on the right, these are transit ads. They're at the bike rental ads. These were actually in downtown Columbus, and they were on several blocks. So I thought this was a little humorous for a couple reasons. One, it shows that the demographics of STIs are changing. You know, there's this silver tsunami, and that STIs can occur at any age. It's not a phenomenon among exclusively young people. It's not a phenomenon exclusively among certain segments of the population, but it is something that affects the population in general. So showing STIs are timeless here in the couple, that's just a reminder to get tested. While there are others in the community that are marketing STI, their position is test and treat. Why isn't this part of our test and treat menu? So that's a question that I would ask yourself. The chart on the left shows the age ranges that are tested in urgent care, the STI presentations by age. And although, again, it does skew younger, which I would say the younger population is probably more sexually active, you do see that it kind of spans age ranges, and both male and female as well. So given the clear reasons why, if urgent care is test and treat, we should be doing STI testing, then the question is, why aren't we? The common objections that I hear, first of all, goes to payment. I would say there are two distinct workflows for payment for STI testing in urgent care. If it is a medical visit, and if the testing is part of the medical visit, it could be to differentiate, and we have clinicians that I'll let speak to the clinical presentations in a little more detail, but say if the patient feels some sensation of pain, is it a UTI? Is it an STI? Is it something else? STI testing is a diagnostic tool for a presenting medical complaint. So the patient tangibly has a medical issue that they're presenting with, that's billed to insurance. And with that, the STI testing would likewise be billed to insurance. Then there are also patients who just want to know. They're asymptomatic. Maybe they were exposed. Maybe they had a friend. Maybe they, for their own reasons, want to know. Maybe they're going into a relationship, whatever those reasons are. And Allie will highlight some different personas in her presentation. There are people that just want to know. That is typically not covered by insurance and would be a cash pay service. And there are some really great examples out there. If you Google of urgent cares that have an all-inclusive testing package, would be paid cash at time of service. Other reasons why many urgent cares forego testing is presumptive treatment. Patients often don't return for results. The examinations compared to a basic head chest examination can be time consuming due to the sensitive nature. Chaperone is recommended recommended for the exam. Some providers shy away from difficult discussions like partner notification, post-exposure prophylactics, public health reporting, and then some look at this and say, we don't need to offer this service because it's available at the health department, it's available at family planning or HIV agencies. Well, if patients wanted to go to those resources, they would go to those resources. We want to establish ourselves as the provider of first resort for urgent care. The last point I want to make is driving patient satisfaction. I did look for a correlation between STI testing and Net Promoter Score. It was very weak, and I think there are a number of variables that drive patient satisfaction in urgent care that it was really kind of hard to isolate, are patients who receive STI testing more satisfied than those that do not? And it may also go to factors that those that are doing STI testing are executing better on all aspects of their business, which would result in a higher score. So while I could not isolate that, I do have a JUSM article coming out next month that talks about the drivers of Net Promoter or patient satisfaction in urgent care. And in effect, it comes to get in and out of the center quickly, with lab results in hand, with a prescription written, and for the staff, without rudeness. So we see that some of these are really more negatively correlated. So short visit duration, in and out quickly, lab results in hand is probably less influential than not having a lab result or not being turned away somewhere else for a lab, not receiving a script, maybe because that information was available, or probably more important than the staff, there's an expectation the staff's going to be polite. I'd say the bar is somewhat low, but if the staff is rude or perceived as rude or snippy or doesn't listen to the patient, those are things that take away from that. So with that, we already talked about urgent care being the provider of first resort, and certainly as a convenient neighborhood next to Starbucks, next to Chipotle, after hours, weekend accessible, one-stop shop for testing, diagnosis, and treatment. This is something I believe patients fully expect to be available in urgent care. And if you're not offering STI testing, I believe you're probably selling your patient population short.
Alan, fabulous job. Very compelling data from both a business and a patient satisfaction perspective. A couple closing thoughts. One is the high prevalence of STIs today and the growing demand is really, the silver tsunami is kind of one of those terms that's just stuck in my head. So I think this really kind of creates an overall impact across all demographics. It's not any one patient type. It's everybody you see walking into your clinic today has a high probability at some point needing STI testing. So you're already treating these patients. They may not just be coming to you, which I think is kind of a new way to think about it, to Alan's point. The long-risk health consequences to STIs, if you're a young lady or gentleman looking to start a family, if you don't get taken care of sooner rather than later, this can be a life-altering event. And the success of treating it and getting that treatment is profound. The opportunity for urgent care, Alan, when you laid out those statistics around half the practices not doing this testing, that was shocking. And then to see that the best practices are doing it, success is simple. Find what works and consistently reproduce it. And this is something that just kind of jumps out there is that if I'm not in this business, I'm fighting with one hand behind my back. And then, Allie, I thought just a great job on the operational efficiencies, what testing to use, and then how to deal with these patients. Because really, it's about getting patients healthier faster. That's what they care about. Every clinician I know, that's what they care most about. With that, we'll conclude today's webinar. Thank everyone for participating today.